Welcome to Liberty and Justice. I'm your host, Matt Whitaker. Today's episode is sponsored by Save Missouri Values PAC. Today's episode is a best of and highlights some of my favorite guests that we've recently had on. So remember, you can always catch every episode at Whitaker. Great podcasts are played. See you next week.
So in that, since you took over really just 5 years ago, talk about the policies that you've implemented. And, that all really conservative policies, quite frankly, that I think many states would be envious of. But talk about sort of those and how they're making a positive difference in the lives of Iowans.
Yeah, it started the first year with issues that maybe weren't as sexy as far as the Republican platform, or so to speak, but things that we thought we needed to do to control the growth of government and to really take back our state. And it started with collective bargaining reform. We saw Scott Walker really lead the charge in Wisconsin back in 2010, 2011 on collective bargaining reform. We did the same thing in Iowa 5 years later or so, to really try to rein in government and get back control of what we do from a state perspective here in Iowa. But then it went on to, we were working on election laws way before it was cool. It became cool 4 or 5 years later, but implementing things like voter ID and really trying to reform our election laws that have really been out of control with the Democrat trifecta, and reining it in to try to cut down the wage fraud and abuse. And so it started with issues like that, but continued with things like tort reform, workers' compensation reform. But then after we started to get the state turned around from inheriting a deficit to now we're running surpluses, now we have the ability to go try to change the tax code and try to make investments where needed, but cut taxes where needed. And so that's where, 5, 6 years ago, we took over a tax code that was probably the worst in the country. And that's not hyperbole. We had like the 49th or 50th highest tax rate in America. And so we really wanted to set us on a path to be competitive with taxes.
Yeah, and I know you also did some things on life and Second Amendment issues. We'll talk a little bit about that. I know that the people that watch CPAC now, those are issues that they care about, and they think a lot of people focus nationally, but in states like Iowa, you've actually moved the ball on this.
Yeah, we tried to move the ball in all the core principles of the Republican Party, including life. We passed a heartbeat bill 6 years ago or so when the life movement was just regaining that steam that you see now is in front of the Supreme Court. So while those might be short-term victories that get overturned in the court, it's changing the conversation and putting something in front of the Supreme Court to take a fresh look at the life issue. It's passing things on the Second Amendment. We're now a constitutional carry state here in Iowa. And so, yeah, we've really tried to take every tenet of the Republican platform and try to implement those conservative beliefs that we all share from the people that put us in power to make changes for the state.
Yeah, and in 2017, when you took over both houses of the legislature, so for 5 years, and you've implemented these policies, how have Iowans responded? Have they given you bigger majorities and even a bigger mandate to accomplish these things?
Well, your listeners probably remember 2018. It was a really tough year. So we had just taken the trifecta in the 2016 cycle. So we had 2017 and 2018 to start these reforms. That was a really difficult time to be a Republican. And 2018 was probably the most difficult year for Republicans in maybe my lifetime. And so it was hard. But we fought through because we knew we were doing the right thing and we knew the results would come. And when it came time for that 2018 election, for 2 years we had heard, oh, the blue wave's coming, you're going to get yours, the blue wave will get you. Well, in 2018, the Iowa Senate, we were actually the only chamber in America out of the 99 legislative chambers that picked up seats. We picked up 3 seats. So we went from 29 to 32 at that time. And then there was 2 more years of, okay, well, we're going to get you this time. And we stayed at 32. And after the redistricting maps come out, I think we have a chance to get up to 34 or 35. So I think it's really simple. I think voters will look at you as a politician and say, can I trust you? And do you do what you say you're going to do? And there's so many politicians in this world that they'll go on the campaign trail to diners and cafes all over the state and make promises. They get down to Des Moines or they get out to DC and they forget everything they promised to people. Yeah. And so that's what we've tried not to do. As a Senate Majority Leader, that's my number one goal, is to, when we get in our caucus room, to start talking about what we're going to do, it's what did we promise the voters we were going to do? And then go actually do it. And that's why I think we've been successful, because we have done everything we've said we would do.
Yeah, back to that State of the Union address. I think you're right. I mean, the Democrats, with they're very disciplined and they're standing up and sitting down and applauding for all the right things. But you had that bizarre moment of Nancy Pelosi rubbing her paws together on burn pits, and then you had Schumer standing up enthusiastically before the punchline, and they just seemed a little disconnected from what the president was actually saying.
Yeah, and then if you watch like MSNBC afterwards, you had AOC and others on there just talking, lamenting about the Green New Deal and things like, there's a war in Europe, right? The United States, the economy's in the tank, inflation's going crazy, right? And they're talking about like, windmills and it's just, it's ludicrous, right? And so the disconnect between just people, working class people in America, Americans who go to work every day and want nothing more than a bright future for their kids, just like everybody else has wanted throughout this great country's history, right? The Democrats are just disconnected from those people for some reason. I'm not quite sure, how and why, but they just don't get it. They're just really missing the big message. They get New York City, they get like San Francisco, they get like Chicago, but they don't get the rest. There are 3,000 plus counties in America. I think they get probably about 50 counties of those 3,000. The rest just kind of scratch their head and they look at everybody like they're aliens.
That's so true. So back to Pennsylvania, the Senate race. You mentioned Fetterman. It's clearly based on that small dollar, broad fundraising base. He looks a lot like Bernie Sanders.
He's a big Bernie Sanders accolade, unabashed supporter of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, and so that'll be interesting if he pulls it through. And then you think it's going to be just a slugfest, most likely between Oz and Dave McCormick.
I think so. Yeah, I do. I think so. I think that, just because they have, both sides have a lot of money. Like Mehmet Oz is not going anywhere because he's got plenty of money and he's invested in this, and his show's canceled, right?
Does he stand? I have not. I mean, I followed this race a little bit, but I have not heard any of the messaging, I guess, of any of the candidates. But what's, other than sort of just being sort of the Republican, conservative, right-leaning, pro-America sort of Donald Trump agenda, has Oz distinguished himself at all, or is it just sort of, I'm a celebrity, you know my name, vote for me?
There's a little bit of that, right, Matt? I mean, I think, unfortunately, Americans are obsessed with celebrity. I think a lot of people show up at his rallies and kind of take a photo, and they're not going to vote for him, but they're just interested in seeing and meeting someone who's been on television a bunch. And, if you look at his campaigns, his announcement rollout ad, looked like he could be running for Senate in any state. He doesn't even mention Pennsylvania in his initial campaign ad. It could have been shot in a studio in Burbank,
Right.
And by the way, during the campaign, you may have famously seen Dr. Oz got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. This is how kind of, I mean, I don't know, who's advising him on this, but, he went out while Dave McCormick and Carla Sands and Jeff Bartos are riding around Pennsylvania. McCormick's riding around in this Ford, F-150 on this farm, riding around and stuff. Mehmet Oz is literally on his knees on Hollywood, kissing his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Well, during a Pennsylvania Republican primary election, like the discordant messaging of, like, you really kiss the ground in Hollywood versus kiss the ground in Pittsburgh. I'm not quite sure. The famous Donald Trump.
I'm not sure I'd kiss the ground either place, but probably Pittsburgh would be more.
I'm a born and raised Yinzer, so that's I'm kissing the ground in Pittsburgh at any time. But that just shows the disconnect. I think that Oz is not a Pennsylvania. McCormick was born and raised in Pennsylvania. Got his nomination from West Point from Pennsylvania. Ran a big company in Pennsylvania. Moved away obviously to run another company in another state, but was moved back. By all accounts, Oz is renting his house from his in-laws, and so it's a tough race. Oz just has a ton of money. I think without his money, the race he would have faded away much more quickly. Carla Sands has some money, but she is fading. You can't. This, like, nothing. success begets success, and so when your polling numbers look good, people donate and continue to donate, and if your polling numbers don't look good, people don't donate. And so I think that's what I think Bartow's campaign and the Sands campaign and the Kathy Barnett campaign are lacking from that a little bit. People don't sense there's an inevitability there, where I do think there's an inevitability around like the McCormick candidacy. I think there's still going to be, a sprint to the finish.
Right. When is the primary date?
May 16th, and so I think that it's still 60 days away, which is 100 years away, right? There could be lots of things take place. I mean, as we just see what's going on in Ukraine day by day, right? Things change by the moment and there. So it's not going to be an easy race. I do like the chances. I think McCormick will be a great senator for Pennsylvania. I think Dave's right on all the issues. He's a very bright guy. He's been a public servant for a very, very, very long time. His wife, Dina Powell, worked in the Trump administration for the president on the National Security Council. She's a very bright woman, very successful in her own right. They're a dynamic team, and Pennsylvania would be lucky to have him as senator from our state. And I think once he makes it to the primary, I think the general election will be a lot, I don't want to say easier, because you never, there's two ways to run an election, I've always been told: scared and unopposed, right? And so, but I do think the general election will look different, have a different feel and complexion than this primary. The primary, the issues are kind of they all, the Oz and McCormick and Barnett and Sands, the issues are pretty, the people's positions are pretty similar, not too dissimilar on all this. So it's really about, who do you think is going to do the best job? Who's going to represent you the best? Yeah, I've been around McCormick, Dave McCormick my whole life, and he's a great retail politician, and you get that. I mean, when he walks in a diner or a room or a gym, everybody when he leaves is like, wow, what a great guy. He's just a great guy, and that's it's not a very efficient way to campaign, but in Iowa, right, during the caucuses and the primaries, and people in Iowa say, this, Matt, people will say, like, what do you think of this guy or that woman? And they say, well, I don't know, I've only met her 10 times, right? People expect that. They expect to see their senators campaigning. So, these folks are making their way around the Commonwealth and shaking hands and making their pitches directly to the primary voters, which I think is, it's beneficial for democracy when this happens, right? You get really, get people that are engaged, and you get people who are, who want to participate. And Pennsylvania's fortunate they have so many people to participate. Look, I'd like to see. I wish that they weren't all running for the Senate. I would, if I had my druthers, I'd encourage some people to run for county commissioner seats, really important big counties that have huge budgets and big agendas. I'd encourage people to run for lieutenant governor or different congressional seats that may have not the strongest candidates in it right now. But unfortunately, everyone's running for Senate. But we've got a lot of strong folks, so we're blessed in that regard.
We're joined by former member of Congress Doug Collins, and before we took a break, we were going to talk about the future of conservatism in the United States of America, how we win back states like your home state of Georgia, which currently has 2 Democrat senators. Right. I didn't think we'd ever see that in our lifetime. But why don't you talk about the things that work for conservatives, and then also talk about how boring conservatives can be.
Well, I think you
Although these folks behind us aren't very boring.
Hey, it's conservative in the house, all right? No, that's why you come to CPAC. It's almost like going, it's like going to church. You get out and you see everybody you agree with. But folks, this is not reality. Okay, out in the real world, people, don't have the same opinions as we do as conservatives. What I found when I was the Republican ranking member of the Judiciary, but also as the vice chair, I got to travel the country. Here's the thing that I found so much, is that Democrats are really good at talking about the results of the people. What does it matter? We as conservatives, how many times have you heard a conservative get on a podcast or talk, well, we had 2.8% growth this year. Isn't that good, Matt?
That's real exciting, Doug.
I was glad to be here at the Rotary Club. Right, because here's what you got to do. I mean, I'm sitting out there. I wanted to take a fork and stick it in my own leg. Yeah. I wouldn't vote for the person. I mean, and I'm out here to want to support them. Here's what you got to do. When is it like this? And I'll go back to one, and when we did the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which actually helped people. I heard so many of my colleagues going out saying, here's how much the stock market grew. Nobody on Main Street cared about how the stock market grew. If it did their 401k, great. What they cared about was their job. They cared about their kids. They cared about their family. I had a businessman highlight this for me. He said, Doug, I appreciate the fact there was a situation in the tax act that said you could same year depreciate large capital expenses. Pretty cool for geeks on accounting, but not for everybody else. So we talked about
You mean
that.
accelerated depreciation is not something we're going to talk about next?
No, we're not. If you're an accountant in the room, I love you, but I ain't talking about it, okay? But what did he said, I love it and I appreciate you did it because he showed me this big old machine. It's a bending metal. This is the coolest thing ever. You've been in like this thing, and they're building.
Don't stick your arm in there.
No, don't get close to it.
That would make the podcast better, though.
It would be. It would have made highlights film too. But he said, Doug, I appreciate you letting me buy this. He said, but I want you to point. And he pointed over to 3 people standing there. He said, and I'll use the name Jim, Susie, and Bobby. He said, last year, Jim, Susie, and Bobby didn't have full-time jobs. I could only hire them part-time. He said, now because I could get this piece of equipment, they have full-time jobs. They now have the money and the resources to send their kids to band camp, to send their kids to school, to make sure that they have the things they need. We as conservatives cannot, and I will refuse to give up to liberals that we're the party that's concerned about people because we're the ones that actually believe in them. The liberals believe in government. We believe in people.
You're right. That is so true. And that the people are sovereign.
Yes.
And the people should control their own destiny and succeed or fail on their own terms.
Right.
And this is so important. And you're right. I think sometimes the messaging is not as effective as it could be. The messaging needs to be not only are we fun, like the folks here at CPAC, as you see. But in addition to being fun, our ideas work. And I think of my home state of Iowa, where they just cut taxes by 50%. Right. Income tax is 50% on the way to go to zero.
Yep.
That is money in the pocket. And now with Joe Biden's inflation tax, where gas prices are through the roof, bread, beer, which I care about a lot, and all those expenses, are increasing in Americans' lives. So more money in your pocket. A better life for your family, a future for your kids that they can succeed on their own terms. That's what American people care about, and that's what conservatives care about.
Oh, exactly. Look, understand something, and I want this because the liberals will take what we say and they move it off a little bit, and they say, well, government, liberals, will say conservatives hate government. They don't think. No, government has a role. The founders actually set a policy for how our government should be limited and functional. The rest of it should be left to us, and I think this is the part. It says, life, liberty, and what does it say? The pursuit of happiness. It don't say the guarantee of happiness. I don't want a guarantee of happiness because if the government had to guarantee my happiness, they have to guarantee your happiness, And look, I'm going to get out there and work. I want my happiness, but it comes at different levels, and the government can't guarantee that. And when we understand that, that's how we go to any community. Red, yellow, black, and white. Race has got to be an issue. And I'm tired of also, CPAC folks, I'm tired of conservatives saying, well, that's not a district for us. That's not a neighborhood for us. No, conservatism works no matter where it's at. We got to be happy warriors like Reagan and go to everywhere.
Yes.
That they would, because the prices have been going up long before Putin, the evil man that he is, invaded Ukraine. And our hearts, of course, we have to pause and go out to the poor people of Ukraine, and the suffering and the death is just horrible. But it's not Putin's price hike. The
only thing that really is imported from Russia is oil and gas. And so that's, like you said, that's excluded from core because of the volatility. And so, we're not getting our eggs and our milk and our hamburger and all those things from Russia, and really Russia has no impact in those markets.
Right. Well, yeah, there might be a little, but the fact, though, is the energy prices started going up the minute Biden took office. And I wrote a National Review article about this recently, but one of Biden's first moves when he came into the White House was that he established a commission to estimate what they called the social cost of carbon, which is like the harm to the earth from burning fossil fuels. It's a quantifiable number. And their social cost of carbon basically gave an estimate of, like, if you had put a ton more carbon into the atmosphere, what does that cost society in actual dollars? Now, in economic theory, then if there's something that's a pollution, like a really obvious one would be sulfur dioxide coming out of a smokestack. It's really noxious to be around that stuff. Then, economists do estimate the social cost of that pollution. And unanimously, economists agree, right wing, left wing, that an optimal policy is to impose what they call a Pigouvian tax on the good, to make it so that the cost of the good is the same as the social cost, so that therefore you don't get all the pollution, right? So you're basically making the polluter internalize the cost of society of his pollution. And so this digression seems like it's just like academic, claptrap, but it's not, because
I love it.
But the cool thing is that in like one of the first reports put out by Biden, they put out a higher new estimate of the social cost of carbon. I took that estimate. Now they're saying a ton of carbon. You're buying a gallon of gasoline, and we know how much carbon comes from burning a gallon of gasoline, or a gallon of oil to heat your house, or natural gas on your stove. And so what I did in this article at National Review, very easy to find, the title is Mission Accomplished, is I estimated what the price of oil would be if the Biden administration were able to get oil producers to internalize the social cost of carbon. Or to put it another way, what is the Biden administration's target oil price? They printed it. They put out a report and said, okay, our target oil price is blah. And the answer is about $50 more than it was when they started, or like about $105, $110 a barrel.
That's about where we are.
That's where we are. And so they waged war on fossil fuels. And I said this to our friend Larry Kudlow on the air the other day. And there's like only one war Joe Biden's ever going to win, and he already won it. And it's the war on fossil fuels. And the reason why that leads to inflation is that fossil fuels are a key component for everything. Like everything takes energy to make, and so on. And so if fossil fuel prices go up, then that's a shock that makes prices everywhere go up. So there are multiple layers of the inflation story, but I think that the energy prices are probably the leading factor, and then of course the runaway spending.
Well, and I am not an economist, nor am I a biologist, but I do want to ask. Milton Friedman said that inflation is a monetary phenomenon, or it's always a monetary. I remember his exact quote, but long story short is it's a complete supply and demand. The more dollars you put into the system, chasing fewer goods, and inflation goes up. Is that at least part of what we're seeing here because of the $6 trillion that was spent in the first year of the Biden administration? That all of that cash sloshing around has driven up the prices for these goods. I mean, I understand that obviously the carbon regulation certainly is a piece of that, but can most of it be explained just by the oversupply by the Fed, especially, and the monetization of the debt and all those types of things that just
you nailed it. And I can say, by the way, that I'm right now at the Hoover Institution, and right where Milton Friedman was for a long time, and right near his office. My office is right near his office, and I was friends with Milton, knew him really well.
It's like talking to Milton.
Dinner with him.
I'm realizing a lifelong goal of talking to Milton.
Yeah, so anyway, so Milton and I would 100% agree what's going on right now. And not. Of course, he's so smart that he thinks of things you didn't think of every time you talk to him. So I'm not asserting that I can channel Milton. But basically what happened was that the Biden administration really jacked up spending. And they did it at a time when they didn't need to anymore because the economy was recovering already. Like basically President Trump gave us two recoveries, one from COVID, one from Obama. And so the economy was fine when Biden took office. Now, it's true that President Trump did mail checks to people during the COVID crisis, right? But suppose that your income is $100 a month. And then I tell you can't go to work. And then if you don't go to work, you don't get paid. And so then suppose the government gives you $100 a month. Well, that's just enough to keep yourself going. And you don't have more money chasing fewer goods because basically you were going to have 100 before, you got 100 now, and we just filled the hole that we created because we told you can't go to work. But fast forward to Biden, and what he did is everybody's back at work, and then he still gave them the $100 a month, say, or it's actually $600 or whatever, and so you weren't filling a hole, which is what Trump was doing. You were piling on top. And so then all of a sudden, there's more money chasing fewer goods, because we're not refilling the hole, we're piling on top. And at that moment, when that happens, then the Fed has like multiple choices. But one thing that could happen would be that the Treasury has to borrow the money to mail the checks to people. And so they have an auction, and the Fed could refuse to participate. And they could sort of say, nope, we're not going to monetize this spending. We're going to make you find customers elsewhere who are willing to do this. If they had done that, then what would happen to interest rates? They'd go way up.
Way up, yeah.
Okay. So what happened was that the Fed decided to buy all that debt. In fact, and we were following it closely during the COVID period when I was meeting with Jay Powell all the time, and my office was, you remember, in the West Wing. Yeah. For some auctions, when we're borrowing money from around the world in order to mail checks to people, we had to buy like $150 worth of bonds at the Fed in order to sell $100 worth of bonds. Because basically what happened was that we were issuing so much debt that we were losing existing customers.
Yeah.
Right. And so the Fed bought an enormous amount of debt. And
you saw it on their balance sheet. Their balance sheet absolutely exploded.
Yeah, it went like that. So now what's happening, okay, and this is where the monetary phenomenon is. So now what's happening is that the Fed is printing money and it's giving it to the Democrats. And the Democrats are mailing it to people who are opening up their mailbox and finding these great checks from the government, and then they're going out and trying to buy things. And so this is almost exactly a helicopter drop of money, right? You print money and you throw it out to people.
A Ben Bernanke type helicopter.
Yeah, it's absolutely a real helicopter drop. But there's like one subtle difference. But since we're kind of doing a mini economics class, that unless you're like Superman and you can fly, there's no expectation that when you get a helicopter drop of cash that you're going to give it back. But in this case, the taxpayers have been mailed checks, but future taxpayers are going to have to pay it back, right? So it's not exactly a helicopter drop. And so if people were fully rational, then they would say, oh, well, they gave me $1, but tomorrow they're going to take it back, so I'm not going to spend it. And if people, so in a perfectly rational world, it could be that this wouldn't have a big inflationary effect. But as we see, it did. Yeah, as we see, it did.